Good afternoon. It is good to be here with you this afternoon for this special early preview and panel discussion of The Body of Christ Has AIDS. Thank you so much for being here today for this special event. Thank you so much to our filmmakers for flying here from California to do this. Thank you so much to our panelists for coming and being a part of this important discussion about this early preview. Let's show them our appreciation as well. This is a powerful film, and I'm so excited for you to get to see an early preview of it. It is slated to be finished next year and submitted-ish. More to come, which makes our early preview all the more exciting this day. My name is Eric Maley. I'm the pastor here at Edge Hill United Methodist Church, and I need you to know that you are on holy ground right now. This is a special place. This is a scrappy little congregation. This is a quirky little congregation. This is a queer little congregation. And many people and entities stand on its shoulders because of the work and the activism and the people who have gone before us, for which we must be grateful. They are not the only ones, but they stand among many as leaders in the fight on behalf and with people with HIV. And so many other concerns, social concerns in our community. I need you to know I'm so proud of this little place. This was the first intentionally integrated church in Nashville, Tennessee. If you know anything about the Reconciling Ministries Network, it is essentially the network of churches where people could find open and affirming places for queer folks in the early days of the movement in the Methodist Church. The blueprint for RMN was drawn based on the work of this church in the 1970s. We're incredibly grateful for that. The work continues today, and so we are so thrilled to be a part of this important conversation. We're thrilled that we have several of our own featured in this documentary. But on behalf of the church, I welcome you to this space. I want to let you know that there are restrooms through this back door and to your left. There's both men's, women's, and gender-neutral restrooms up beyond the steps. So know that our facilities are back through this door. Just to give you a quick overview of what this afternoon will look like, in just a few moments, we will have our filmmakers introduce the film. They will talk a little bit about the film, what it means, its context, and what we're going to be seeing today. We will watch some clips from an early preview from the documentary, and then we will have a panel discussion with the filmmakers, with Dr. Tyee Link from Nashville Cares, from Dr. Ellen Armour from the Vanderbilt Divinity School. It'll be an important and meaningful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation with the panel as we have planned this. They are incredibly important leaders in this community. After the panel discussion, we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A directly with the filmmakers. And so you have cards and pens in your seats. I encourage you, if you think of questions about the film, for the filmmakers to go ahead and to submit those questions now. If my collectors would stand, my 3 film card collectors, thank you. Wasn't expecting to get applause already. Go ahead and write your question. You may be seated. Go ahead and write your question when you have it. Don't wait until the Q&A. If you have a question, go ahead and write it down, and you can raise it in the air, and they will go ahead and collect it and give it to me so that your questions can be in the queue, and we're not waiting to collect questions. But we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A with the filmmakers. And then at the very end of our time together, we have a special piece of art that PFLAG has commissioned in honor of Phil Michael Thomas, who is an incredible leader in our community, an incredible member of this church, a tireless advocate for so many causes, but particularly on behalf of people with HIV. And so this piece of art was commissioned to honor his legacy, to honor his activism, and it'll be presented to Edge Hill United Methodist Church today. So we will end our time together by revealing this piece of art, and you will have an opportunity to spend some time with it at the end of our time together. Last but not least, this film is in process. This film is being crowdfunded, this important conversation. And so when you see this film, I know that you will want to join me in supporting its important work. You have the opportunity to do that. The QR code on the banner over here, you can donate to the church. You can mark it as you're able for the Body of Christ Has AIDS. We will know what the donations were for on Sunday afternoon, and we will get those to the filmmakers, and you have the opportunity to make a tax-deductible gift. So I invite you and encourage you to join me in supporting this important film. At this time, I want to invite Nashville Cares, Mr. Doug Alexander, up to share a word of greeting with you from his organization.
Thank you, Eric. And I just want to say thank you for reaching out to me and inviting us to be part of this special event. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited about this film. I'm excited about the dialogue that it creates and the work that these filmmakers are doing. Because for whatever reason that they are motivated to bring this discussion to the fore, it impacts a lot of people because we all know that we are subject to our past, right? And Christians have, over the last 20 years or so, by and large, many parts of Christianity have determined that they are going to show compassion and that they want to be a part of this kind of work to help people and to show compassion and to love people. But that wasn't always the case, and it was a struggle in the 80s when this disease came to the fore. It was really scary for a lot of people, and unfortunately, everyone didn't react the same way. And so I think this conversation is really important. So I just want to say thank you for you all for coming out. Thank you for being here today on this sort of gray day in the middle of the holiday season. And thank you for hosting us. Thank the filmmakers for the work they're doing and the panelists for the conversation we're going to have today. Last thing I'll mention, back on the information table, I put some brochures about the CARES 360 clinic. That's our clinic within Nashville Cares. If any of you, thank you, gentleman's holding up the brochures. You're welcome to grab one of those and take them with you. If any of you know someone who's looking for a health care home for themselves that is respectful, non-judgmental, people who can really connect with them and help them understand their own sexuality, come to Nashville Cares, come to the CARES 360 Community Clinic, and you will find dignity and respect there. We are always looking for folks, especially LGBT folks who are looking for comprehensive sexual health care, whether they're HIV positive or not. Happy to help in any way we can, especially in the area of prevention. That is all I will say. Thank you again, and back to you, Eric.
Thank you. So grateful for the work of Nashville Cares, for the witness of Nashville Cares, which has done so much for our community for so long. I want to shift now to introducing our filmmakers, who will then introduce the clips that we will be viewing together from the documentary. Margaret Irwin has worked in the arts and entertainment sector for over 30 years. She was the first and only chief of staff to the first female president, Dr. Laura Tremblay, at the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens. Margaret was the co-producer on the Normal Heart stage production in Los Angeles. She was a founding partner in Backstage Door production. Since 2019, Margaret has held office as the elder director on the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council. In 2022, she was elected to the board of trustees of Cornerstone Theater Company. Welcome, Margaret. Thank you so much for being here with us this day. Stephen Hale worked with churches and nonprofits for decades before taking a leap of faith to start Capital Hope Media, which specializes in film productions for nonprofits, churches, and anyone else trying to make the world a better place. He has written on theology, pop culture, youth ministry, international development, and tech strategies for a variety of publications. Stephen sits on the board of Inalienable, an international human rights NGO. Stephen, Margaret, welcome. I turn it over to you to share a word about the film.
Stephen's going to kill me because I'm going off script already.
She's doing it already.
So I just wanted to do a 2-minute anecdote, and that is that 3 years ago when Stephen came to me about doing this film, it's just the two of us as filmmakers, I went to Bishop Mary Ann Swenson, and Brenda Barnes will probably remember who this is. And Bishop Swenson has been a bishop for many, many decades. And I asked her, I said, we're going to do a film on HIV and AIDS, and the church's response, what church should we go to? And she didn't even miss a beat, and she said, Edge Hill UMC. She said, I served food there. I used to go there. Even as a pastor, I would fly to Nashville for meetings, and I would always go to Edge Hill, and they would serve food. And she said, when it came to HIV, right, the members are laughing. When it came to HIV and AIDS, Edge Hill has led this country, has led the Methodist Church, and so you were the first trip we did. So thank you for always being so kind and generous and welcoming us. So I just want to say that real quickly. Is that okay?
No.
No? Dang it. Darn. So you already know my name, so I'm going to introduce you to Stephen.
Hey, so I want to tell you about this production and where Margaret and I are. I took notes because I tend to ramble. So it's just the two of us. It's just the two of us working on this production. We've been filming for about 3 years, and we've been honored to receive these sacred stories and to be entrusted with them. And I hope that we'll be judged faithful. We've been filming. We filmed in 13 cities. We filmed medical researchers, including the people who started the first HIV outpatient clinic in the world was in San Francisco, Ward 86. We filmed them, medical researchers, pastors, Christian leaders, from bishops, lots of bishops, to laity, right? Clergy aren't the only people who lead in Christianity. We've interviewed historians and academics all over the country. For us, it's important to tell I think there's a lot of nuance in this story, and we're trying to cram this story into 90 minutes, right, to have this feature-length movie. And it's important to tell a balanced story, right? Because ultimately we're wanting to tell a story of Christian heroes, Christians who stood up and did what was right. But y'all know, maybe better than I do, that that's not the majority of the story. That the majority of the story is that the church was silent or worse. We think of Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, right? So we have to tell this balanced story. We also have to tell a story that doesn't make it seem like that it was the church that was doing all of the response to HIV, right? It was the queer community and other marginalized communities who led for years with almost completely alone. So telling this story in a balanced way is very important to us. We're wrapping up filming. This trip, on paper at least, is the end of filming. And we're shifting into post-production, that nebulous process of getting the musicians and the score and the editing and all this stuff and the lawyers and all that stuff. So that's kind of where we are in our process, and maybe we can talk more about that later. And what we wanted to show you today is basically almost unedited footage, but give you some sense of the film and where we are.
And you're going to recognize some people in it,
Yeah.
for sure.
Is that it? Do you want to
No, that was really good.
Go press play?
Yeah,
I'll do it.
All right. Press play. While he's gone.
But Joel then introduced me to other young people in the Tenderloin, and I began going once or twice or so a week to walk in the Tenderloin from, like at 11 o'clock at night until 3 o'clock in the morning.
I think what's fascinating is we always look to Stonewall as the birth of the modern day liberation movement. I really think that it really started in the 1960s with the Council on Religion and the Homosexual. Lyman World Church in the middle of the Tenderloin knew that the gay community was growing, and the church had no real relationship with it. So pastors, clergy from the Bay Area through Glide gathered with members of the LGBTQIA plus community and built relationships. But what was fabulous was the clergy went to where gay people were, which was bars and dance halls.
The Council on Religion and Homosexual was an organization that was started by the churches in San Francisco, and Glide was very involved in that. But the year before I got there to do my internship, they had drawn together clergy and openly gay persons from various religious backgrounds to come together and to talk about how they could talk to each other and do some things that would be helpful for changing the mindset of so many religious people about homosexuality. So they wanted to have some churches that would be welcoming of homosexual people, and they knew that there needed to be a witness to how Christianity does not prohibit people being gay or have to call it a sin. And so they were trying to form a support system for educating and communicating that the church can be an affirming and welcoming place for gay people.
What was helpful was there was a growing understanding of what it meant to be a gay man or a lesbian or a transgender person in the 1960s. And clergy began to stand in solidarity with the community, to the point of New Year's Eve ball. There was a law that same-sex couples couldn't dance together. Well, the clergy said, "Don't worry, we're going to be there." The dance was still rated.
More than 800 cases nationwide, 300 plus of those fatal. And every day, 3 more cases are identified. And yet, still, surprisingly few people are familiar with the Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or the acronym by which it's frequently identified, AIDS.
The first cases of AIDS in the United States, recognized as such, because there may have been a few earlier that weren't really recognized, were in the very early 1980s. So the very first report was a short little story in the New York Times on cases of an unusual cancer called Kaposi sarcoma that were interestingly all in gay men. And that was in 1981, and really just a week before I saw my own first patient with Kaposi sarcoma on July 1st, 1981. But these patients came in socially isolated, scared. They knew what they were up against. They were wasting away. People would be so weak they could literally not raise their arm from bed. They couldn't care for themselves. They couldn't feed themselves. They couldn't clean themselves. AIDS caused many people to become blind from infections in the eye. They were demented from infections in the brain. So nothing can prepare one to take care of these people. My first patient was a 22-year-old man from a good Christian family in the South who ended up in San Francisco, ended up in my hospital when I first started, had Kaposi sarcoma, this purple skin cancer all over his body, died within months, died with another cancer, lymphoma, died with a pulmonary infection, pneumocystis pneumonia, and these mysteries, and was none of us able to tell him what to expect, except that he knew he was going to die. When the numbers grew, and when concerns about the possibility of infection were raised, especially by one of the residents who was pregnant at the time. Was it safe for her to sleep in the bed used by an AIDS patient as an exam table during the day? We said, we don't know. and very quickly the hospital found a space for a dedicated clinic, the first in the world, in one of the old red brick buildings on the campus, building number 80 from the old days, the 6th floor. So in the way that areas in the hospital were named at the time, Ward 86, so the 6th floor of building number 80. We were given access to that. It was empty, and it was used, half of it was used once a week by a jazzercise class to set the tone right. But that was our clinic, and we opened on January 1st, 1983.
The church's record on HIV/AIDS ministry is very mixed. One needs to recognize that the group that did the most in terms of advocacy and offering frontline care in the United States was the Metropolitan Community Church, which was a church which the National Council of Churches rejected. They rejected their membership. So, and so we're a strong supporter of the National Council of Churches, but they have been marginalized over the years, but they were the ones who led the way during the worst of times in America, and their leadership was key to this. Other churches did speak out and do things, but most churches did not actually put money into the programs as a denomination.
The flower vase is filled with the lives and memories of the people this church has loved. And I can tell you, as I've learned the stories, they're still deeply loved, even though they are long gone. Marcus, he was a bird of paradise. His family abandoned him because he was gay, because he had AIDS, was dying of AIDS and knew his time was close, and he was worried about what would happen. He knew his partner didn't have money to pay for his funeral. And the lay leader at the time went to everybody in the church and said, Marcus is getting close to death, he's worried about it. And so people wrote on slips of paper, I pledge this much money, I pledge this much money. And then the lay leader at the time took those slips of paper over to the funeral home across the street and said, we have a member of our congregation who is dying from AIDS and is worried about this. And so we have these commitments and work to deal with the funeral home so that he would be cared for. And then he went back to Marcus and said, you don't have to worry. We will take care of you when your time comes, and we will care for you. And so Marcus was able to die in peace. And when they had his funeral here, this church celebrated his life. And I heard from many people that his family did show up for his funeral, but they sat there motionless, tearless, and left and didn't come downstairs for the fellowship.
When I think about it now, I don't know how we made it through. I don't know how you can have so much death and so much suffering with such a young people. There was something that happened at Edge Hill that my whole spiritual life changed after that. There was a sense of gratitude that I knew before, only feeling good things, feeling the feeling I get when I watch a beautiful sunset or sunrise, where God's present, and you really feel that. And it was on to me that through all the tears that I was feeling the joy, the love, and profound grief. But it was because we came together and made that happen.
So that's a very rough, it hasn't been through post-production, piece of going from Act 1 into Act 2. And now we're going to show you about probably 8 or 10 minutes of footage that we've taken when we interviewed in Nashville. So we thought you would like to see some of the powerful stories that your Nashville folks, some who are in the audience today, some of their stories that we have on film, and different pieces of them will be in the movie. And as you can tell, Edge Hill UMC is going to be in the heart, is the heart of Act 2 when people stood up and fought. So these are some of the stories we hope you.
I've talked a little bit about infection control. I was fortunate in having a wonderful infection control team of nurses, and one of their jobs was to educate everybody in appropriate infection control, and they did so regarding AIDS and how we at Vanderbilt Hospital could take care of AIDS patients professionally and safely. That was underway. We were taking care of such patients. There was a wedding in Nashville, and someone from California, San Francisco, who had AIDS and had been cared for in California, came to this Nashville wedding, but became sick, had to be hospitalized, came to us, we cared for him. The thing that still sticks in my mind is that when he left, he said he had been cared for with complete respect, professionally, better at Vanderbilt than in California. And that made my heart sing. I was so proud of our infection control team. And teams like that, all over the country, were assuring that in their hospitals, patients with AIDS would be taken care of professionally and effectively.
That's how you remember your spirit is out in the world. The love and care that you put out in that world for 40 years is still out there.
Well, I'm still so proud of our team that he could say, yeah, in Nashville, in the South, he was cared for better than he had been in San Francisco.
To the church where I, had worshipped in Memphis, which James Lawson came to be the pastor of. And there was a young man who lived down the street who was fairly frail and small in size. And we were in the pool at the YMCA on a day when Big Richard happened to be at the pool. And some of the rest of us were there. We were just doing what we normally do in terms of playing in the water. And there were these two people who were really kind of picking on this one young man who all of us kind of knew to be somebody who was feminine in the way in which his life image was projected. And these two guys decided that they were going to harass this one young man. And when they were, pushing him in the water and doing all kind of things, clearly he was not having any fun with it. He was young. And all of a sudden, Big Richard was there that day, and he jumped in the water and not only helped the young man by picking him up and sitting him aside, he began to really kind of manhandle those guys that were harassing him. And I remember that had an impact on me in terms of thinking that his experience in life and his way of being a part of everyday life probably made him a person who would be a defender of those who were different.
By the time that we offered our Strength for the Journey camps, there was a lot more women. So the population was women and men, especially persons of color and white folks. My friend Dave was the dean of the camp and was just passionate about it. And I'm just going to talk about Dave just because I can. So Dave, we had a service here to celebrate his 25 years with HIV. And he wanted us to do his memorial service then so that he could be there. And this was about 10 years ago that we had a celebration for Dave. And I've got some pictures of that as well through the rest of his life. And I was so intimidated by that because he had these amazingly beautiful stories of climbing up into the bed with someone who had AIDS and whispering to them, it's okay to go.
HIV, AIDS, has its own chapter at HL. I'll tell you a few things of it. Of course, we had Ed and Al who opened their home, and they welcomed persons dying with AIDS. And it was just a beautiful chapter. And as they dealt with the family, some of the families from out of state could not bring their son home to, say, Mississippi because of the danger that they would have. So they would come and visit them here and with Ed and Al. I remember the day that a gay couple brought their baby to be baptized. The mother had AIDS, and she had a daughter, and then she had this baby son. And the gay couple, she was giving the kids to the gay couple. And Bill Barnes, I think it was Bill, was then baptized the baby. And one of the fathers carried the baby around the room as we sing, bless his life, Lord, bless his life. And the baby died a few months later, but it had a place in our church, in our chapter. And these are things that happen, that are gifts from God, because we are open to every person.
When it went through, it was called GRID for one time, gay-related infection, because they really didn't know who it came from. And there were several groups that were actually identified, but those groups fought against having any type of recognition to this, and the only one that really they put it onto was the gay population, and made it to gay cancer. So actually when it first started out, there was this unknown illness. People didn't know what was going on, but they did know that a cough was a major problem, was a major symptom, and you had a lot of people that got real paranoid even when they got that cough. Because at one time, pneumonia now was one of the biggest factors on taking people away. Oh, very much. So I saw a great deal of prejudice in the field during that time when people started to ostracize. Even within the gay community, not knowing what was going on, people shunned, kept people away. If you saw someone who was thin or not feeling well, whatever, you even saw, even within the gay community, because they didn't know what was going on, they pushed them away. Families, I saw families kick people out. I saw roommates kick people out. I had situations where I knew personally of people that came out of the hospital, went back to that roommate situation, only to find their bags out on the front porch for them to pick up, not even allowed to come back in. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety about it because no one knew what was going on. They didn't know how easy it was to contract it. It went everywhere. And there was the pastor. And his wife, Brenda. And I'm thinking, oh, And the way that the whole conversation was and other people was involved from the church, I'm thinking, wow. I say I was not accustomed to seeing a church like that. I'm sorry. Just because I've seen where churches pushed people away. You're no longer God's child. You are trash. You're unworthy. Go away. But actually, they didn't do that. And I'm thinking, oh, they embraced it here. And they meant when they said everyone has a place at the table. And I met other people that started to come to Edge Hill. And I started to recommend people to come to Edge Hill. People are like, no, I don't want to go to church. I'm so pushed up. I said, I had that same feeling. I said, but I found out Edge Hill wasn't like that. And no, come with me. And I said, and it's not, they don't make a big deal of what's going on. But I will tell you, as a physical church, they do like to hug. So if you don't like to hug, you tell them up front, I can't do this shit. But they're going to hug you. Because these are people that haven't been touched by anyone for a long time because of that fear, that ignorance, that I don't want you to touch. I don't want you around here. I've seen too many parents, too many families, how they have, when their loved one died, how they even had a funeral. Well, they didn't tell nobody that they had died. They had the funeral, they got rid of them. That's what I call it. Because they let other people to come in and join and mourn with them. They let them go. But I came to Edge Hill, and I thought, yeah. And then I got a chance to work with Brenda, which is Bill's, the pastor's wife. And she was a nurse, and it's funny how we all had this circle that Nashville was a large place, but at the same time it had a small community of people willing to do things like that. And it hit me, this is the only church that I found where people are doing this. And it just, I realized then that Edge Hill not only believed in what they was doing, they walked the talk, they believed it. Because some places will give you a message and they don't mean it. But Edge Hill did. And I'm thinking, oh, that's wonderful. You know, even when people was to the point they was close to dying, they realized they were still loved. You know, maybe not, you know, sometimes you've had to get new families, new friends, but that's okay. But at least you found out before you close your eyes for the last time that you was worth it, that you are.
Powerful stuff. At this time, I'd like to invite our panelists to join me up here in the chancel, have their seat for our panel discussion. And as they are making their way up, I will just remind you that not for the panel discussion, but for the Q&A with the filmmakers, that we are requesting questions from the audience. So if you have questions for the filmmakers that you would like to submit, you can write them on the note cards in your seat or next to your seat and submit them. And if you simply raise them in the air, we will have people who will come by and will collect those and submit those to ask later during our time together. Well, you've already met our two filmmakers. I want to introduce our other two panelists. Dr. Tai Link has a doctorate in organizational leadership and a Master of Divinity and a Master of Science in Community Counseling, as well as a Master of Business Administration. Dr. Link is the Program Director of Healthy University at Nashville Cares, a peer program for individuals living with HIV that focuses on education, advocacy, and social networks in an atmosphere of empowerment. Dr. Link also serves on the Scientific Review Committee for the Vanderbilt Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, and on the Epidemic Advisory Work Group, which is in response to the National Strategy for PLWHA. She has led numerous workshops focusing on HIV/AIDS, provided patient education to first-year doctor's program students at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. Tai is a member of Tennessee CFAR, if I'm saying that right, Center for AIDS Research Work Group, Faith and Spirituality Research Collaborative, the National Community Action Boards. Dr. Link also serves on the Nashville TGA Ryan White Planning Council. If you couldn't guess, her passion and calling is empowering and serving the HIV plus population. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Tai Link? Who will also be featured in this documentary now. So that's another plug for the documentary released sometime next year. Dr. Ellen Armour is professor and E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Chair of Feminist Theology at Vanderbilt Divinity School, where she directs the Carpenter Program Religion, Gender, and Sexuality. Her research includes theologies and theories of gender, race, sexuality, and visual culture. Her most recent book is Seeing and Believing: Religion, Digital Visual Culture, and Social Justice, published in 2023 by Columbia University Press. Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Ellen Armour? Thank you all so much for being here for this important conversation. A lot of what we'll be talking about is the church's response to HIV, but we'll get into some other areas as well. Some of the questions will be for anyone. All of them are really for anyone. Some will direct to more specific panelists, but we'll begin here. The subject of the documentary emphasizes how churches helped or didn't help people with HIV. Where did people with HIV find the most support, and where did the church fall on that spectrum of support? And that's for anyone to respond to.
Stephen?
I think it depends what time period you're talking about. I think it shifts a little bit over time. But I think generally, early on, maybe that's a better way to frame it. Early on, there were very, very, very few churches that were helping. Early on, frankly, there wasn't a lot to be done, that no one had any solutions. Doctors didn't know what to do. And so early on, there was essentially no help. You hear stories about, in places like New York City and things, gay activists would start to pull things together. And I think early on, that's what you saw mostly. If there was support to be had, it was mostly coming from the queer community. With time, other organizations started to improve. We've noticed a trend. Most of the churches that are like, yeah, we were doing AIDS work really early. You're like, well, how early? And they investigate. And it was like 87 or 88. We hear that a lot, which in retro, to me, initially, I was like, well, that's 5 years in. You weren't doing anything for 5 years. But I think there's some truth to that. But I also think it's true that I think nobody knew what to do for years. Yeah, maybe that's some helpful context.
Absolutely. Would others like to respond?
I think there were some early churches, like Metropolitan here, 81. There was a sprinkling of churches in different cities, and maybe they didn't know exactly what to do, but they did support. So I think if you know, look back in history, where, especially in the African American community or the Black community, a lot of attention wasn't given to that community. There were people living and dying from HIV. However, they weren't noticed. They, you know, it was a thought that Black people can't, you know, contract HIV. And then when they did, they were, of course, calling it what it is, but it may have been called pneumonia. It may have been called, you know, a form of cancer. But I think the Black church was helping some Black churches just to support before it was given a name.
I'll just add a couple of things to it. It makes sense to me that that Metropolitan Community Church would have been involved, given that the foundation of that church was founded because gays and lesbians were being excluded from other denominations, couldn't be ordained, et cetera, were considered sinful and so on. And so that organization, that denomination was LGBTQIA plus centered from its very inception. So it makes sense that it would, partly because a lot of its own members would have been affected. Mm-hmm. And so it would have been, you know, just right in their, not even in their backyard, but in their living room, we might say.
And I'll add, for context here, the Metropolitan Church here in Nashville for many years struggled to find a place to worship. It tried to worship with various other congregations to use their building. No one really wanted to welcome them or provide them space in the late 70s. Edge Hill was the bottom of the list. And they were welcomed to worship here, and that's what started for Edge Hill in the late 70s. A lot of our more intentional interest and activism around that. There was a big pushback and uproar from the conference, from the Tennessee Conference of the United Methodist Church, but that's what really started a lot of these conversations for us here. Dr. Armour, what do you think drives the tension between religious groups and support for HIV patients? Why is it treated so differently than, say, something we read about in Scripture like leprosy or any other disease that Christians would typically rush to support?
I think it's because it is a sexually transmitted disease. And Christianity has, for most of its history, had a very difficult time dealing with sexuality. And it has a particularly difficult time dealing with sexuality when it comes to non-normative folks. So that means both LGBTQIA people, but also people of color. And when you have those two in combination, that's a pretty good indication, right? We think now, for example, of the purity culture and the purity movement as something that's really more characteristic of evangelical Christianity. But I would argue that it's really deep in the DNA of Christianity. And probably, I could go on and on about this, probably goes back to our dear friend St. Augustine, who really connected the source of sin to sexuality. When he's the one who came up with the doctrine of original sin. And the main evidence for the effect of sin is in sexual disorder. That for us, it's a really funny story in some ways. I'll make it short. You know, some people would say, well, we know what would have happened in the Garden of Eden had Adam and Eve not sinned, right? Well, most people said there would never have been sex at all, right? Well, Augustine said, oh no, there would have been sex. There would have been. But it would have been very unlike the kind of sex we have now where we're not in control of it. It would have been sex under the control of the will and the mind. So Adam would have said to Eve, you know, honey, it's time that we produce another child so we can get to the correct number of saints that God has preordained. So let's do it. No hiding behind trees. You know, we'll just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, I guess. I don't know. But no pain, no pleasure. You know, just kind of, and voila, another baby, right? That ain't the way we experience sex now. And for Augustine, that was a clear sign of sin. And it's also the mechanism by which sin is passed down, because he understood it as a kind of inherited disease. right? And so I would say that's the root cause of why Christianity has had such a hard time with AIDS versus other diseases.
Thank you. Others?
Could you clarify what you mean by purity culture, purity movement?
Yeah, the purity culture is basically built around the idea that sex is only to happen between a man and a woman when they're married, okay? And the whole idea then is that, you know, we've got to raise our children in a way that they grow up into that that's the only way sex can happen. So you might see these examples of purity balls, purity dances, where the girls dance with their dads and take and accept an engagement ring that basically is saying, I promise I will not have sex with anybody until I'm married, a man until I'm married. And it's a culture that's really, you know, built around, tends to blame women or girls for any kind of sexual activity that views women, and women particularly, as tempters. And again, this goes back to Eve, right? This goes back to Eve. And so it's a whole culture built around that, and that tends, as I say, tends to blame women for any kind of sexual misbehavior, right? So policing how women dress, policing how girls walk, policing how they interact with boys, if they are allowed to at all that kind of thing is really the key piece of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Would others like to respond to that? Why the church has responded to HIV in ways that were different from other diseases?
I would agree 100%. So it's not really adding something, but the church takes out the education of sex, sexual health. It takes out the talk about pleasure within sex. It excludes the Song of Solomon, or say that it's completely symbolic. And so that would make sin a taboo. And that's exactly what it does. Yeah.
Thank you. We know that HIV didn't first arrive in gay men, but it was first recognized by the medical community in gay men. For example, it was as prevalent amongst IV drug users in the Bronx, even in the late 70s. What communities were first affected by HIV in Nashville?
I would say, even though publicly you would see white male gay as the community, a lot of black community did suffer. It just wasn't reported. It wasn't shown, it wasn't broadcast. And so the news gave a narrative that often left out a complete population of people around the country, not just Nashville, around the country. And so, you know, for a time, you know, black men, black women, they cannot contract HIV. That's what was thought of until they did. And then it was always another reason. But for a long time, black folks didn't get the help they needed. They died from pneumonia or types of cancer or something else, but it wasn't HIV at first.
Yeah, as we have toured around on the East Coast and the West Coast, which people sometimes refer to as the first wave, because it was the gay white men, really predominantly, that was being treated. And we talked to Dr. Paul Bolberding, the one who founded the AIDS ward, Ward 86, and he was I asked him this question. I said, I have heard, you know, Stephen reads a lot of books, and so we had done some research on, Stephen's the reader in the group, but we had gotten a lot of research and feedback that in San Francisco, and then we learned this in Manhattan, interviewing a scholar there, that yes, the men were being treated and getting all the resources, but then when you cross the bridge to Oakland into Berkeley, lower income, persons of color, brown and black folks, they were not getting the same kind of resources. And then we just came back from Manhattan in September, and we learned the same story. That it was in the heart of Manhattan, the white men who had more money, who had better insurance, so the socioeconomic inequity has really played into this story more than we were aware that it would. And so I think there's a lot of layers to this answer.
Tell Brenda's story about Nashville and
If I let you talk long enough, you've told Brenda's
Oh.
story.
Brenda would tell the story of, well, you're sitting right here, so I'm going to watch your face, and when you make a face at me, I messed up that detail. I haven't watched this in a while. If I remember right, she would have these, Brenda did a lot of research on HIV at Vanderbilt. She was on a team that worked on that. And then she would do these like clinics with women and people at night where they get together and have discussion, like support groups and stuff. And we were like, oh, so it must have been a bunch of poor people, right? And she's like, no, there were Mercedes in the parking lot. They're well dressed, well-to-do.
Like, it blew my mind because this was the first place we filmed in St. Louis and then here on the same trip. But you were like, Mercedes from Belmead, these women, women married to doctors and lawyers. And we're like, that's not the stat in the book, that you see on the timeline online. That's not the story that was told. And so Ted Koppel didn't tell us that, right? So thank you, Brenda. You sent us down a rabbit hole. And we have been for 2 years researching that. So thank you.
Dr. Link, there's a popular perception that HIV, quote, arrived in black women later than other populations. How true is that in the USA, and how true was that for Nashville?
Well, it's not true. The first case that was noted by the CDC was 1983 of a black woman. So it was early on, black women were noticed of having HIV. It just wasn't reported. It wasn't in the stats. It wasn't definitely not in the research. Black women didn't exist for that until they did. Until the numbers couldn't lie about the numbers because the rates were going up and up. So I would say it would be the same in Nashville. There were people here with HIV. It just wasn't reported. It just wasn't important enough to report. Which still goes for today. A lot of things that are happening in the black community are not reported, when other communities are not reported. The same went for them.
Thank you. Dr. Armour, do you think young seminarians going into ministry today are going to emerge with a different or more progressive view of sexuality and or HIV than previous generations?
I would say it depends on where these seminarians are being educated. My guess is that if they are being educated up the road at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and I should say I was raised a Southern Baptist, my dad was a graduate of that seminary. I lived through the fundamentalist takeover of that seminary, so I have some personal ties there, which may be why I'm bringing it up. But I'm pretty certain that whatever kind of education those students are getting is not going to be anything like a progressive education around sexuality issues and so on. On the other hand, if they happen to find their way to Vanderbilt Divinity School, Denise, yeah, right? Yes, and Bob, right? They will get the kind of education that I think people need today. And I want to spread that out a bit. First of all, the issues around sexuality and gender identity, for example, are really baked into our curriculum. It's not just me that teaches courses that deal with that. Our scholars who do biblical studies talk about that in their courses. We talk about it, our historians talk about it as well. So it's really kind of deeply ingrained in our curriculum. But that didn't come just by happenstance. I mean, maybe in some ways it did, but it was in part because of the commitments. In some ways, Vanderbilt Divinity School has been like Edge Hill. It's been a school, an institution that's been committed to issues of sexual justice for a long, long time and social justice for a long, long time. So it kind of makes sense that would be key. I want to speak, though, specifically to the issue you raised, Taya, about sexual education, right? One of the things that I'm most proud of, I have to say, is one of our alums of Vanderbilt Divinity School, Reverend Lindsay Godwin. Some of you know, yep. Lindsay has actually crafted a curriculum, a sexual education curriculum that she teaches in the summers at church camps, for example. She was a member at Glendale Baptist Church here in town and was my assistant director of the Carpenter program for a long time. And we have had her come back and teach a course built around that curriculum to our students. So that, I think, is a key piece, and that's something I think we really need more of. I would really like to see her get that thing published and out there, so that people could use it in a wide variety of places.
Thank you. A common assumption is that mainline denominations tend to be more supportive of people with HIV. Number one, is that accurate? And number two, is there any progress being made in more conservative denominations?
I think there's a little progress being made in more conservative denominations or traditional denominations. They allow more of HIV testing, some capacity building that's going on, but they still have an issue with talking about sex. It's limited. They still have a problem, some churches, with giving out condoms, for instance, or talking about homosexuality. That's still a major mountain that needs to be crossed. But I do see some movement, at least discussion is being done.
Yeah, and I'll just second that. I think, it's actually interesting to see even in the Nashville landscape what's happening with some conservative denominations. Otter Creek Church of Christ, for example, is actually, I understand, an LGBTQIA affirming congregation. How they do that in the Church of Christ, I'm not quite sure, but they are. The Metropolitan Community Church is also a kind of complicated denomination too, because it has a more kind of evangelical focus. And then I think it's Grace Point Church is also a non-denominational evangelical church that several years ago changed its orientation and its position around LGBTQIA plus folks, and have been consistent about that all the way through, and yet an evangelical non-denominational church. So I think there's hope, and from a variety of different theological perspectives, so that it's not just the most progressive denominations that are embracing this, but actually even more conservative ones.
And I'd like to third all of that, because one of the main threads through the movie, the foundation of the movie, is the United Methodist Church, because first of all, we both have access to churches and churches like Edge Hill, so that's the heart in Act 2. But Act 1, we start in the 60s, and so there was a movement in the Methodist Church to be very white, Protestant. You had a dog, you had children. It was very that. And then it started split, saying, but what about loving our neighbor? And then in the 60s, and it became part of its own social. But then there were outside forces and internal forces saying, no, we need to go back to where we were. So the Methodist Church spent 50 years until 2024, when we went to Charlotte and filmed, when they took out what I would like to call hate speech towards LGBTQ, A+, being ordained. They weren't allowed to be ordained, and all these things. And you had to be, if you were single, you had to be celibate, but that didn't. The heterosexual couple didn't have to. The main person didn't have to in writing. So there were lots of rules, and it was 50 years ago that there was. Christianity in 1960.
Christianity is incompatible.
Yeah, homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and so that was in there. And so we get the thrill in the movie in Act 3 to go and delete that sentence, because it's now out of the Book of Discipline in the 2024 book. And so, but it took 50 years of people going against and saying, no, this is homosexuality. So when AIDS gets introduced at the 1984 General Conference, there was action immediately. Oh no, we're going to double down against that. Then we've got to double, instead of it being you saw Reverend Dr. Don Messer was interviewed in Denver, and he talks about that there was an action against, as soon as they brought up that HIV is out here killing people, these men, and we need to do something as a church. In that same conference, there was a group of traditionalists who were saying, oh, we better double down more. We got to double down against the gay community more in our churches. And so that's 50 years of history. And we have 90 minutes, but we're going to try to tell it as succinctly as we can and as interesting as we can. But that whole fight within a denomination, I think, is quite interesting. Because both sides, let's give them sides, we're saying, but we're the Christians that are right.
One final question, and this is in particular for Dr. Link. Can you tell us a little bit more about the origins of Nashville Cares and how it first developed?
Nashville Cares developed in 1985 out of a need to take care of people who were living with HIV and dying. And so it started out of a need to take care of people, and then in 1985 is when the charter was established. And it took care for people to educate the community, to do some outreach for people living with HIV and those at risk for living with HIV. And so I think it started out taking care of largely what was seen, which was white gay males, and it has expanded over the years until now is for anyone. It is status neutral. And that's like many organizations. They started out just what was seen, and then they began to understand there were communities that were not seen that needed to be taken care of.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can we show our appreciation for our panelists? We're going to shift quickly to a lightning round. Not really a lightning round, but there's never enough time for these wonderful conversations. But for a time of Q&A with our filmmakers. So we've had a few questions submitted. We'll try to get to as many as we can in a few minutes. And once again, you can submit them. We'll have our card picker-uppers come and pick them up, and we'll get to many as we can. For the filmmakers, what themes, what threads of narrative have emerged in the process of filming that you hadn't expected as you set out on this project?
Yeah, all of them. That's right. Well, the first one that comes to mind is that in 1987, I was working backstage in theater in LA, and all the men in the wardrobe and box office and hair and makeup were dying, right? It was 6-month death sentence. And so I remember in real time, then it became, in those years backstage, and then it became the black women statistics skyrocketed. And I never understood why, like that connection. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to make the movie with Stephen is, let's dig into this. Let's really figure out why was it. And so there's so many levels to why that is. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't realize that like the Bronx, the heroin drug users in the Bronx in the 1970s, that they were seeing something that was HIV adjacent kind of thing in that piece. And so they were trying to, but there was one tiny article in the New York Times, right? And then it was kind of ignored. And so those kinds of stories, so we went to New York to investigate that. So I think those are a couple of pieces I can remember.
Yeah, I thought that one was really interesting. I think for a lot of it was these misconceptions that we had that I think are shared by the public. You know, we thought, like Margaret said, we thought numbers skyrocketed amongst black women, but that was a statistical question, not a question of what was happening in human bodies, right? And learning about how, these doctors, that they're 90% sure that they're like, that was HIV. Looking back, I don't have the data to demonstrate it in an academic way, but there was HIV spreading through the Bronx, and there was like a pneumonia explosion in '78, for example, and they're like, that. Looking back, it was HIV. We just didn't know it yet. There's stuff like that, and then, but I think then there's just these little stories from like this church in St. Louis, right, that are nobody knows this story about this, different people that did things. Nobody knows some of the stories that happen here, these quiet moments of kindness and people being there for each other. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't make it into big fancy history books, but really matters. And yeah.
Thank you. Kind of piggybacking on that question, what interview had the biggest effect on you personally and why?
Brenda Barnes is in the house. I would say Brenda, Dean Thompson. I think that for us, because it was so early, Edge Hill. Edge Hill really set the tone for the movie. Yeah, I really feel, and Phil, of course. I think Edge Hill set the tone of, these are sacred stories. Stephen and I would get on airplanes and go, these are sacred stories, we have to hold these. We went to Ward 86, and just so that we could stand in the hallway. We rode the elevators, and we were saying, there are moms who didn't go with their sons, but there were also moms who went with their sons. We just kind of get chills, just like those. So those moments for us of trying to, because I lost a dozen friends, and Steve was just a baby back then. Steve was young, but being able to find those moments in this story that newer generations will understand the heartbreak, but also the resilience and the care and love and compassion and things that came out of this. Because then we just went through a pandemic and people were politicizing it, and it was like PTSD for those of us who went through it in the 80s and 90s. I forgot the question, but I thought, is that a good enough answer?
That's beautiful. We were asking what interviews had the biggest impact on you personally.
I want to add one too. I agree with what you said, that Edge Hill, because it was early and powerful, but we interviewed Reverend Jim Mitulski, who is a MCC pastor and a UCC pastor, and he was pastoring in the Castro district, which is the neighborhood in San Francisco. And he was pastoring there in the 80s. And there's a podcast that's out about this now. They recorded on cassette tapes all of the sermons from these services. And another academic named Lynn Gerber is leading a team. Lynn's cool too. Yeah, that was the same day. We talked to both of them. And they are both in ways that are different. They're more academically minded. Even Jim is sort of very theoretical and then figures out how to work it out into practice. So yeah, I would call attention to those two.
That's great. Thank you. Will there be more coverage of Dave Daniels in Strength for the Journey?
Yeah, Strength for the Journey actually was what inspired the initial core of the idea for this. It started out as an idea to make a documentary about Strength for the Journey. And then Margaret and I got to talking and realized you can't quite make a 90-minute film about, and so the idea evolved into this. So yeah, Strength for the Journey and how it gets started is part of one of the major, there's sort of three narratives that we follow through the film. One is sort of the Methodist story. It starts in 1964 with a Council on Religion and the Homosexual, and there's a character who was there and at the founding of Strength for the Journey, and then came out as a gay clergy around 93 or so. And that story sort of leads into a denominational story, and so we can use the Methodist denomination sort of as, every denomination has their own story, but in a lot of ways they're also sort of similar. And so that's one story, the Methodist-ish story. Another one, we're hoping to focus on Reverend Edwin Sanders, who's here in Nashville and is a titan of Christianity walking around in the world. And then the third one is the Metropolitan Community Church and Jim Mitulski. So yes, Strength for the Journey will get a lot of attention in the film.
So many people with HIV feel isolated and suffer profound loneliness. Being able to overcome, quote, church hurt and reconnect with the church may help in some cases. How is Christianity demonstrating that it is moving on from, quote, blaming the victim to showing true compassion? How is the message of change, of a chance to reach those who need it, who need to hear it?
I'm not confident it is completely. I think there's an energy out in this world right now that is wanting to keep the divide, wanting to keep the racism and the bigotry and all that alive and well. And so I think this sense of, like I said earlier, that this Christian says, I'm the one who reads the Bible and I know what it says, and then this one says, did you read about Jesus? Because he didn't talk about that. So there's just two sides, and I'm not sure, I'm not confident yet how this works itself out. But we have definitely been respectful to folks we have talked to who have been harmed by the church. And I tend to ramble when somebody tells me, what's your movie about? Because if I know it's someone who's been harmed by the church, like some friends or something, because I immediately go, it's not a Christian movie. It's not it's not about, yay, the Christians came in and did this conversion camp or something. Like, that's not what it is. It's a complicated story. And the Christians are the heroes, and they're also the villains in this movie in many ways.
Yeah. For me, I think that's kind of what motivated me to make this movie, right? I like Margaret said, I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s, right? Until I started working on this movie, I think I'm not aware of knowing anyone that had HIV, right? So for Margaret, it's this very personal motivation to make this story. But for me, it comes out of my commitment to the church. I believe that if Jesus is at work in the world anywhere, he's probably at work in these dark places, right? He's at work in places with people having a hard time. Or we can point to, if you know these terms, liberation theology or Luther's theology of the cross. I think that reflects the Jesus that's revealed to us in the New Testament. And I didn't grow up in churches that did that kind of thing. And so I think so many people my age are looking for examples of that. We don't even know what it looks like to see that at work, but there are people who do, and for me, that's one of the reasons I want to make this movie, because people like some of the folks that were here at Edge Hill or some of these other churches we're visiting, those are examples that the rest of us need. Christians my age need examples like Dean Thompson to say, you know what, I'm not working on HIV and AIDS, but I see what Dean did, and I can do that on whatever my relevant issue is.
And we have very much focused on, we want the conservative Christian to go watch this movie. We want the most progressive Christian to go watch this movie, and both leave having been inspired. That's a tough goal, but that's our goal, is we don't want to offend anyone. We just want to tell an authentic story that's honest. And if we tell it authentically and honest because of brilliant people like on this panel who are making sure we tell it right, then it's a sacred space that we're holding, and all kinds of Christians can be in that sacred space together.
Thank you.
In 90 minutes.
That's right. One last question for you two. When the film is finally done, after someone sees the movie, what is one sentence to describe you want them to use to describe their experience? What do you want that sentence to be when someone sees the film to describe their experience of it?
Whoever asked that's brilliant.
I think I want them to have had a religious experience. Even if they're not a religious, sometimes you just have a spiritual experience, and even if you don't kind of have great language for that, I think that's when I'm sitting and watching this footage and editing it and being reminded of things I hadn't looked at in 18 months, that's what I have. And I'm kind of thinking about what you said about even conservatives and progressives, whoever, like wherever you are ideologically, I want you to see these stories and say, oh, right, that's what it looks like when a Christian might say, that's what it looks like when Jesus is at work. There was this book that came out years ago by Philip Yancey called What's So Amazing About Grace. Anybody heard of this book before? Yeah, I might be apologizing that you're aware of this book, but there was a visual edition of this book that came out, and you can kind of tell the subject of the book just by the title, but the visual edition was all these like mixed media pieces that were printed in a book, right? And so you'd flip and there'd be a new like thing, oh, that's provocative, that's something to think about, you'd flip it. But then every other page or so was another story, and there were these stories of grace at work in the world, right? And that's how this particular book framed it. And I think this movie is just story. There's so many stories of grace or goodness in the world. And I hope people leave deeply moved by that.
My short answer would be, that I want the person to walk out of the theater, no matter what whether they're religious or not, to walk out and turn to the person with them, hopefully they went with somebody, turn to the person and say, I can have whatever kind of faith or spirituality I want, and I don't have to have others tell me how to treat people. I want to I can go do good and not have somebody say, well, the Bible says this, and you can't go help those people because the Bible says that's a sin, or whatever. I just would love for them to be able to leave and go, yeah, I can go help people. Yeah, it's that simple.
Amen. Thank you. Can we show our appreciation for our filmmakers and panel? At this time, I'll invite our panelists to be seated, and I'll invite our representatives from PFLAG to join us up front.
Is anybody from Phil Michael's family here? I didn't know if they were going to be able to come or not. One thing I thought, Phil Michael, if you don't know who he was the last person shown. And when he said, I hope before they took their last breath, they knew they were worth it. That's what I hope for him. I'm Kathy Halbrooks, here to represent PFLAG Nashville. Our chapter is part of a national organization that offers affirmation and support to LGBTQ+ people and those who love them. In addition to attending meetings, Phil Michael Thomas was on our board and served as community liaison. He sat at tables at many events and did speaking at schools and other organizations to let people who might need us know we are available. I answer emails and check our voicemail. I called on Phil Michael many times to talk to people in situations that I felt inadequate to respond to. He never failed to help anyone. As most of you may know, he was active in several organizations because community involvement was so important to him. Edge Hill United Methodist Church was dear to Phil Michael's heart, and after talking with the leaders, PFLAG Nashville decided to commission a painting by the amazing artist Mary Button as a lasting memorial to a man we all adored. I'm honored to present the painting to Edge Hill Methodist Church in memory of the much beloved Phil Michael Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who has been a part of this important conversation. Feel free to stick around to come and appreciate this wonderful work of art up close. Just one final reminder. First of all, before my final reminder, the interviewees who are present, who are in the film, those who are present here, would you please stand so that we can acknowledge your presence? Brenda and Dean, and I think there are others. Would you please rise so we can acknowledge you? Thank you for your witness. Thank you for your ministry. They will be signing autographs after this event. Finally, one last reminder that this is a remarkable story. It's a remarkable collection of stories as we have all witnessed today. So just a final reminder and encouragement to join me in supporting the work of this important film. You can give through this QR code that is on the banner to my left, to your right. We also take checks, cash, Venmo, whatever and however you would like to support it. We will make sure that your tax-deductible gift goes to support the ongoing work of the body of Christ as AIDS. Thank you so much for your presence here this evening. Thank you to Nashville Cares for partnering on this event. Thank you to our filmmakers and our panelists for being a part of this important discussion. Go in peace, friends. Don't go to pieces.